Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. You are warmly welcome wherever you're joining us from, be it in Africa, Europe, and around the world. As we say in Germany, herzlich willkommen. My name is Olumide Abimbola, and I'm the Executive Director of APRI, Africa Policy Research Institute. APRI is the Africa-focused think tank in Berlin, Germany. We bring a critical and distinctly African lens to global public policy issues, especially those that have implications for Africa's development potentials, and especially the ability of African countries and governments to create jobs for the youngest populations in the world. We are not doing this alone, but in partnership with reputable universities, institutes, and civil society organizations around the world. One of such is the University of Johannesburg, our partner for this event today. This is the first in a series of webinars on digital policies that we will be doing together with the University of Johannesburg. So stay tuned for more. As a new policy institute, we are trying to do things slightly differently. For one, we're bringing perspectives that are often not at the table to policy discussions. And we're prioritizing the work and voices of those who know the most about the realities of African countries. We pride ourselves in not being prescriptive. Instead, we take a critical and discerning stock of existing policies and/or planned projects that African governments intend to implement or are implementing to solve critical issues that are facing them. We do this before offering policy options on those issues to African stakeholders and to their partners in Europe and around the world. We think this is a much more productive approach. One such critical policy area that we intend to take stock of as APRI is Africa's digital landscape. Under our Africa's Digital Agenda program, we will be dissecting and shining the light on Africa's tech and digital sectors. As a first step today, we are launching the first paper developed under that program. As you will shortly hear from my colleague and co-authors Bhaso and Faten, we went through the documents of every African country to see what they have on the books as digital policies, strategies, and initiatives. The result, which you will hear much more about shortly, is a comprehensive map that clearly shows that an overwhelming majority of African countries have made plans for how to harness digital technologies. The promises of tech and digital are huge. The future of work, we have been told several times, is digital. Africa is home to at least 5 unicorns, companies valued at more than $1 billion. At least a quarter of Africa's population has internet access, and it is projected that by 2030, Africa will achieve parity with the rest of the world on internet access. In other words, there are very good reasons to be optimistic about Africa and technology. But a lot of things have to work right and together to ensure that what is being called Africa's digital revolution delivers on its promises. At APRI, we will be working to support that process. I'm really glad that we have an excellent afternoon lined up today. A distinguished panel will be moderated by my colleague Faten Aggad. But for now, I hand it over to Bhaso Ndzendze, Head of the Department of Politics and International Relations, University of Johannesburg, to present the major findings of our paper. Don't forget to engage with the conversation. You can ask questions in the YouTube chat box or on Twitter using the hashtag Africa's Digital Agenda. Bhaso, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Olu, and let me say congratulations on the establishment of APRI, and congratulations to the team as well that you work alongside. So as you've laid out, I will speak briefly, hopefully very briefly, but succinctly to our paper titled "What is Africa's Digital Agenda?" co-written with Olu and Faten. So getting into the paper, I hope to do 4 things very quickly. The first is to lay out, to sort of ensure that we are on the same page and work out some key definitions and leading questions that determined how we went about researching the paper. Then I will give an overview of the research process, again, so that you can check us when you read the paper. You can, in a sense, also be able to replicate and maybe even supplement some of what we found. And one of the things we pride ourselves on is how comprehensive this paper was, thanks also to some really excellent research assistance. And then I will go over the key findings, zooming in on a few case studies, and then finally look at the policy implications of what we found and say something in the way of recommendations. So very quickly then, the starting point of the research for us was that basically a digital agenda refers to the use and regulation of digital technologies. So governments here tend to play both roles because they are both participants as well as the rule makers. They are both referees and players, but the three main actors, or the other two alongside governments, are consumers and households, as well as businesses, with civil society playing a role alongside these. So the key sort of variables of interest for us when we look at a digital policy include things like infrastructure and logistics, how digital technologies are being utilized there to make logistics more efficient, to supplement, and in some cases to replace traditional infrastructure. A part of this also then naturally includes communications, but the uses of digital technologies also touch inevitably on education, entertainment, and the creative economy, while also being very important for production and retail, financial technology, and cybersecurity in all these areas is crucial, as we will see. So there are multiple proxies, as it should be clear when we look at digital policy and digital agendas, how a country is doing, how a government's doing. You could utilize a number of proxies, including internet penetration, including the distribution of that internet access. It's not enough just to have a country, in a sense, overall having this number of people participating in the internet, but the type of people that participate. You don't want a situation where there is a gender maldistribution. There's a huge gap between rural and urban. There's a huge age disparity as well. And then the other important facet is online retail participation, e-commerce, as well as a number of specialized indices, many of whom track these variables and many more. So our leading questions then were the following: how many countries, if any, have digital agendas as part of their policies? How many, in fact, have articulated strategies on digital policy and can therefore be said to have a digital agenda? And then looking further, we wanted to know what emerges of those countries that do have these strategies. What emerges when we examine them, and can they be said to be an African agenda? And then finally, what could be done to ensure that external players effectively partner with the continent in order to ensure that its digital potentials are realized for the benefit of all Africans, first and foremost. So in terms of carrying out the research, we really triangulated. We made use of a number of documents. The first to go to would be the specific sort of standalone documents that speak to digital policy. But then we found that actually this is sometimes not enough, that a lot of countries don't have standalone, articulated digital blueprints or digital agenda documentation, but they do say their aspirations and they do lay out roadmaps in their national development plans. And indeed, development without infusion of digital technology is unthinkable in the 21st century. So that was another important source, a sort of secondary but very important source. And then finally, where there was neither document type 1 or document type 2, we then found that a number of countries will say something nonetheless in other documents which are neither standalone strategy documents or developmental plans. They will say something in something rather quite specialized when they talk about cybersecurity, or in official statements that the policymakers of the affected countries would make. So we, in a sense, found then that the overwhelming majority of countries on the continent have digital strategies, with the exception of very few. I think less than 5, as we'll see on the map. The countries that then we zoomed into, because we wanted a sort of mixed sampling of different countries based on the WF's Global Competitiveness Index 4.0. It's part of their fourth industrial revolution thrust, and so they measure the competitiveness of countries alongside key dimensions of fourth industrial revolution economies. And so we found that, so those that are in green on the screen, there are those which have specific standalone strategies. Those in blue would be ones that that have digital dimensions to their developmental plans. And then those in black would be those that that we sort of triangulated and sourced materials in different from different sources. So what emerges then, as I said before, is that pretty much every country has something to say about its digital aspirations, but then also that they are economic, they are clear leaders, and maybe this will not surprise anybody, although there are some surprising elements nonetheless. So in our sample, there were key or clear leaders: Egypt, Kenya, and Mauritius. In the sampling, these are, and for reasons I'll touch on for Mauritius in particular. Egypt is also the only country that we could find that has a clear policy on artificial intelligence. But overall, there are 3 clear-cut goals that we've identified. The first is economic development. These countries want to utilize these technologies, the emerging technologies and sort of more established technologies like the internet, for economic development. And part of this also touches on skilling their citizens or reskilling their citizens. The second one is participation in digital economy as well as e-government and service delivery. These governments want to use these technologies in order to be more efficient, in order to be more responsive. Of course, a part of this is where civil society comes in, might also include surveillance. So data governance is quite crucial. And then finally, there are issues of sovereignty for these countries. Cybersecurity is key for these countries. They want to fortify themselves and protect their data and their cyber sphere by making use of these technologies and research in this regard. Also, then, this is to secure digital payments and digital financial services. As it should be clear, these are relatable goals. We have a diagram which shows that actually, if you think about it, the securing of payments and digital financial services touches on economic development, which in turn touches on and is anchored in e-government and the digital economy as a whole. So it's not just that one stands on its own. These are overlapping priorities. So here is our map, a very comprehensive map showing what types of documents each country has by way of articulating its digital agenda. As we can see, the countries that have the white shading with gray lines are very few. Those are the countries that we could not locate, and we looked very hard. I should reassure, and we could not locate. It's Libya, Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, Comoros, and Sahari, in West Africa. So these countries we could not locate documentation for, but on the main, and Eritrea and Djibouti, sorry. So these are the countries that then do not have, but as we can see, the overwhelming majority have, and some have more than one type of document. And this is important because we also find that having actually a digital strategy has a bearing on how much a country has actually accomplished in some of its plans, as we will see. So it's an important predictor, if you will, of how much a country will have gone into actually actioning its priorities. The more a country has, in our finding, those countries which had specific strategies were more likely to have to rank highly along a number of dimensions, and it's not coincidental. So this is just to document. It really, if there's one slide that summarizes our work, it's this one. It shows the source material, and it shows the goals that we identified, as well as the circular sort of relationship that we identify in terms of the priorities that the countries set for themselves. So let's look then very briefly at three different types of countries, and we think here each one is a kind of representative or a kind of stand-in of the type of story you would find when you look into each individual country, and by way perhaps of creating a typology. So Mauritius would be one of those countries that has a clear strategic plan. Gambia, somewhere in the middle, and Gabon finding its way. This excludes the fourth type of country, which does not have neither a clear-cut plan articulated as such, or in fact digital technologies as part of its broader developmental plans. So Mauritius, for us, we found was quite a leader. In fact, we found very specific data points, which also shows how seriously they take this, how far they've gone, and how well they track it. Because we could find, for example, that ICT contributes about 5%, 5.6% of Mauritius's GDP, with a growth rate of 4.4%, and even the number of people working in ICT about 23,000, and more than 750 businesses, and growing in this space. It also had the highest e-governance development index score among countries on the continent, and has broadened penetration of mobile phone access by 145.6%, and as many as 350 Wi-Fi hotspots within a 2,000 square kilometer radius. It also then is going further and planning on an innovation and emerging technology strategy as part of its 5 pillars on digital Mauritius. And it wants to establish a Mauritius Artificial Intelligence Council, as well as increase awareness of robotics and drive financial technology services. So it's carving a niche for itself. It's taking a whole of society approach to robotics and AI. Then we sort of find in the middle the case of the Gambia, which has made some gains, but also then is winning in some regards, ticking some boxes, but still has some way to go on others. So Gambia hopes to increase the percentage of its population that has access to the internet from 20% to 90%. So it's currently at about 20%, as well as increase mobile penetration from 79 to 90%. You can see even its loftiest goal still, for example, compares less favorably compared to Mauritius, and wants to double the proportion of schools that are connected to broadband internet from 6 to 12% at the end of its planning period. So the country has, however, made some huge levels of progress on mobile phone penetration at about 164%, although internet access remains modest at about 23.7%. And in fact, this is one of the things we want to highlight in terms of mobile phone penetration, because there can be people with more than one or two even devices. So the distribution is not just the penetration, but the distribution of access to mobile phones. And then the country, this 23.7% of access to the internet is part of a growing trend. So this represents as much as 22.8% increase, but 23% increase from the previous year. So this is definitely a country on the move. And then finally, looking at Gabon, which has the Emerging Gabon Strategic Plan, where it declares that it plans to be an emerging nation within the digital market, digital economy, with an emphasis on human capital than its natural resources. In other words, it wants to be an efficiency or innovation-driven economy and less of a factor-driven economy. And in the 2011 to 2016 strategic orientations, the country anticipated, so this was 2011, it said by 2016, we want to have digital infrastructure across the entire country, including rural and urban, as well as improved digital services, faster internet service, cheaper internet costs, greater digital inclusion for low-income demographics, and an effective e-governance and digital economy policy. But when we review, these goals had not been, in fact, accomplished by 2016. But there's still some hope here. There's still indicators that, especially in the area of effective e-governance and digital economy, the country's ranking or score rather in the EGDI has been growing from 0.35 in 2016 to more than 0.5 as of last year. So this is definitely a sort of moving country. But if you were to create a typology, it ranks lower than Gambia, which in turn is moving a bit slower than Mauritius. But again, it shows the importance of having these articulated plans. They are very, very helpful in setting the goals so that even if a country falls short, it still makes some leaps in some regards. And so moving then, as I sort of wind down into the recommendations that we found or that we make in light of what we've found, basically the emphasis here is on the advantages of a continent-wide approach, and I'll speak a little bit about that, to digital strategy, which ensures a homegrown African digital agenda and a better position for African partnerships with international players. And so we want to also make clear that when we talk about a continent-wide approach, we don't mean a sort of unitary approach that would require so many other reforms, including in governance. But rather what we speak about here is something that we think is actually a rather low-hanging fruit, which is harmonization. There are these different plans, we saw the map, but they can be better harmonized in the process. And then the other key finding we make, and which requires some correction, is that the process seems, the process of digital migration and digitalization seems to be excessively government-led. And this is a major sort of missed opportunity because government has to be incredibly good at planning. It in a sense, heightens the weight of the burden on governments. Although there are some exceptions here, such as Senegal, which is also very private sector leaning. And then we also note the need for a balance between regulation and over-regulation, and sometimes punitive digital lawfare in the leveraging of digital taxation. People are very suspicious of taxation. There is a recognition on the one hand that big multinational corporations are stifling and in fact are running roughshod over local digital markets. But there's also a suspicion of the other type of a stifling agent, that is the government. There's a suspicion here that whenever there's mention of digital tax, some countries have experimented with social media tax. There's also explorations of taxation of streaming services, but these always reach or are greeted with some suspicion because the timing is also sometimes questionable. They seem to be politically motivated than revenue-driven or regulatory, objective regulatory policies. And then the continent's digital priorities are vulnerable to being set by other players, other major countries and emerging countries if multilateral approaches continue to lag. And so we make the case for a continental for Africa to lead in the process. And in fact, this is not only in the best interests of Africa, but in the best interests of the would-be partners and some of the early stage partnerships when it comes particularly to the digital sphere. So this African leadership in setting its digital landscape would ensure greater rate of success, actually, because the regulations and objectives would be developed within specific contexts. That's why, again, we speak of harmonization rather than unitary. If EU and China should not set Africa's individual policies of individual countries, then perhaps also neither should Addis. But what Addis should be doing is coordinating, is ensuring harmonization. And then the digital models adopted from or introduced by different partners with divergent visions would ironically also lead to further divergence in standards, what some call the splinternet. I have a master's student doing some excellent research on this, on the notion of the splinternet and some of the consequences that it's having and it will further have. And so that would further stunt the continent's digital landscape. It would be very stifling, all these different standards and pulling in different directions. Then the African leadership in this sphere would also guarantee against potential reneging on regulations and objectives, since these would be owned by the African stakeholders themselves and in fact reflect their aspirations. And then finally, African leadership in setting its own digital landscape and ecosystem is more likely to lead to innovation within the continent, as externally sourced regulations can stifle local innovation. And so this is now the case for harmonization. To wrap up, we think there are 4 key benefits here. The first is resource conservation and optimization. The second is investment attraction, because there will be a predictable environment from country to country. And then there is the benefit also of taxation, whereby foreign multinationals would not be able to play off different countries on the continent against one another. And finally, the case for human rights, because if there's a common standard across the continent, then this goes a long way in at least setting the environment in such a way that there is a clear stance on human rights and clear cases of human rights violations on the digital sphere and the protection of African netizens. So that is just a summary of the key pillars and what they should constitute: multi-sectoral participation as a starting point, and then across the continent, harmonization of standards and regulations, as well as controlled dialogue led by Africa with external partners. And we think this will lead to a sustainable innovation system across the continent. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and we want to thank some excellent research assistants in the writing up of this paper, Olayemi Soneye, Neulitswalo, and Johannes Sahololo here at the University of Johannesburg. Also want to thank the reviewers for their inputs and their comments in the production of the paper. And of course, the usual disclaimers apply. Any omissions or errors squarely ours. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I will now hand over to my colleague, Faten Aggad.
We have a bit of a problem with Faten's connection, so I'm gonna sub for her for a few seconds before she comes on. So at this point of this afternoon, we will be having a panel discussion, and so we have 3 panelists for us here today. One of them is Alison Gilwald, the other is Aliyu Aboki, and there's Treasure. We're waiting for her to join too. It seems to be a very interesting afternoon for internet connection today. But bear with us, we'll get there. Oh, I think Faten has managed to join. So I'm going to step out and hand it over to Faten.
Hi, Faten. Are you with us?
Are you able to join? Okay, if she's still not able to join, then I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists, and then when she comes on, she will take it over from me. So first of all, we have on the panel today Aliyu Aboki, who is the Executive Secretary of the West Africa Telecommunications Regulators Assembly, WATRA. It is a subordinate body of ECOWAS. He has over 15 years of experience in the ICT industry. Aliyu's mandate at WATRA is to support member state regulators and other stakeholders to play a more strategic role in shaping the regulation of the telecom sector in the sub-region West Africa. He oversees the harmonization of a sound regulatory framework for the telecommunications service delivery in West Africa, with focus on ICT as a tool for socioeconomic development. We also have Dr. Alison Gilwald. Alison is the Executive Director of Research ICT Africa, an African digital policy and regulatory think tank that works across 20 African countries. As adjunct professor at the University of Cape Town's Graduate School of Development, Policy and Practice, she supervises doctoral students undertaking transdisciplinary research in digital governance, policy and regulation. Alison has provided technical assistance to several African countries and regional bodies, advising the Ministry of Communications on the South Africa's broadband plan, SA Connect, and for the African Development Bank and Government of Mauritius on the iMauritius broadband policy. She has worked extensively with multilateral agencies such as the International Telecommunications Union, UNCTAD, and the World Bank. And we are hoping that Treasure is still going to be able to join us. Treasure Mapanga is the director of the African Electronic Trade Group. She is the immediate former director for trade and industry at African Union Commission, where she spearheaded the establishment of a continental free trade area. Prior to joining the African Union Commission, she was the deputy country director for the International Center for AIDS Care and Treatment Program in Swaziland. Treasure previously worked as the chief of office for Africa at the International Trade Center, a joint venture of the World Trade Organization and the United Nations in the Geneva office, where she had the role of coordinating the ITC's strategy in Africa through policy reform. Before I attempt to lead the panel, I'm going to check very quickly to see whether Faten is able to join us now. Faten, can you join us?
Hi, Ulu. Apologies about that. Yes, thank you.
This happens. We seem to be having an afternoon, but it's okay. This happens, and I'm handing it over to you now.
Thank you, Ulu. I believe that Treasure is with us, so perhaps I'll go straight to her with just to kickstart the discussion. Treasure, the question that I had for you was that as we just discussed, the digital revolution offers a number of opportunities for the African continent. In his presentation, Bhaso spoke also of the potential of regional integration, particularly to boost the continent's ability to tap into that potential. But I was wondering, from your point of view, if you could reflect a bit more on the opportunity that regional integration can represent for African countries, and whether you had any reflections on the levers that African countries could use to make sure to tap into that agenda. And here, particularly, I'm thinking of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA, which you were one of those who helped develop. So over to you, Treasure. Thank you.
Matthias, could you please check if Treasure is on? Maybe she needs to be upgraded to be a panelist. Not in. Okay. I think we can ask the next panelist, Faten.
No problem. Perhaps we move to Mr. Aliyu Abuki. It's particularly useful to have the regional perspective, as Ulu mentioned. You're the executive secretary of the West Africa Telecommunications Regulators Assembly, which is a subordinate body of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. And coming at it from the perspective of ECOWAS, I was wondering, Mr. Abuki, whether you can highlight some of the work in terms of what has been done at the level of ECOWAS, but also what are the challenges or persisting challenges still facing countries, as well as the opportunities that remain untapped. Over to you, Mr. Abuki.
Right. Thank you, Faten. Thanks, everyone. I'd like to start by stating the obvious. The realities of certain limitations in Africa. The limited state capacity in the context of competing priorities and limitations of, say, low-level rates or literacy rates in many countries. Given the realities, I can say that Africa has a fairly robust digital agenda. That is an appreciation of the socio-economic potential of telecommunications and the policy, legal and regulatory frameworks that have been created to support that kind of potential. ICT has been an extremely powerful and all-pervading force. It has pushed countries even the most capacity challenged countries to create frameworks to guide investment. Yeah, and this is also because ICT infrastructure is largely self-financing, and the services that it enables or supports can centrally be taxed. Now, acting on or implementing existing agenda has as big development payoff as fine-tuning and building new agendas or building on existing agendas. This is true on a national level as well as a continental level. Now, given the limited capacities and the competition in priorities, I think we must start thinking of what the biggest opportunities are. It's very, very critical in the content level. I prefer to see opportunities rather than challenges. ICT, you would agree with me, has integrated Africa and the world, allowed us to leapfrog and close development challenges, gaps in development challenges, gaps in ICT infrastructure and access to services, compared to, say, in other sectors like healthcare and say motorable roads, is less wide. So I think ICT can also help us leapfrog critical gaps in areas like education, agriculture, and healthcare, making our societies more healthier and more productive. I think these are really the biggest opportunities. We will be able to close critical gaps, like say the digital divide, moving low-income populace and demographics really to become IT savvy, and then the adoption gap being the reality that a lot of people are unable to use services effectively, more productively, even in areas where they're available. Many just probably use their phones to call and receive calls, even though they've got sufficient income to key into digital services and products. I mean, some even have smartphones. Agriculture, extension services has almost disappeared. We have more out-of-school children. So, I mean, it's important now to really know, how do we now kill two birds with one, say, digital, with the digital stone, so to say by integrating EdTech with conditional, say, cash transfers. I think, I believe that we need close collaboration between governments, service providers, and external development actors. The realities of Africa really is what is important really to these external actors. So I mean, there are really, I would say, very big opportunities. We at WATRA is not really a regulator. WATRA is not a policy maker. We present, say, evidence of the best policies and regulations that stimulate investment, enhance affordability, enhance access to member countries, and encourage them in a harmonized way to adopt these regulations and policies. So, and then I think there are big opportunities in member countries adopting and adapting some of the work that have been done in other regions, all the good work, learning from each other, and trying to trying to fast track, the digital, enhanced digital economy. Not really even, even in the piecemeal fashion, without a big agenda or on national level or country level. There is a lot that can be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abuki. It's indeed interesting, and I would agree that it's very important to look at the opportunity rather than seeing it as a problem or a hindrance as such. On that note, perhaps I'll come back to you, Treasure. The question that I had for you, and still in the spirit of tapping into the opportunity presented by the digital revolution. I was wondering what your reflections are in terms of the potential of regional integration in helping the African continent tap into those opportunities, but also if you can reflect a bit on the levers at the disposal of African countries to tap into that potential. And there I'm thinking particularly because you being one of the architects also of the AFCFTA, whether you could also reflect on the potential of the CFTA and boosting the continent's capacity, but also opening up some of these opportunities to tap into the digital revolution. Over to you, Treasure.
Thank you very much, Faten, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to join this very stimulating conversation. And I would just like to start by saying that it is so important for us to use this opportunity to reflect on how, as a continent, we can move forward more deliberately and more systematically towards shaping this agenda in a way that will basically create a whole new narrative than the one we've had before, where we've had windows of opportunities open and not fully take advantage of them. Now, for the digital economy, and to your question about regional integration, indeed, there are a number of important policy instruments, which I'm sure the audience is also familiar with. The African Union has defined, a digital transformation agenda, which has basically come up with the very sort of broad, ambitious goals of where the continent wants to use digital tools, technologies, and so on to address some of the development challenges that we face as a continent. But on the economic side, I just want to say that the AFCFTA is one of the instruments that we have all been looking to. And it's but it is an agenda that I just want to, as much as it creates huge opportunities, it also it's not a panacea to solve all the issues. So what opportunities are there? Within the ambition of the agreement, we have a number of protocols that are being negotiated, and the protocol on goods has been the one that has advanced the furthest, even though they still have some issues that they are addressing, which we hope will be resolved soon. And but on services, the services protocol has identified some priority sectors that are critical for the digital economy and digital transformation agenda for the continent. And I think there is, it's important that as those services like distribution, like financial services are being looked at, we find a way for the policy making processes to juxtapose this with the important trends that we see around e-commerce and digital trade. And when you look at what is taking place on the continent in terms of this agenda, we have seen that we have a number, I think there are about 700 e-commerce players, that are active on the continent, facing a number of challenges, and some of those challenges having to do with interoperable payment systems, some of them having to do with the whole area of logistics and mobility, which we are looking towards the digital agenda to somehow address. So what we are seeing is the e-commerce protocol within the AFCFTA package also being added onto this package of protocols. And also we have another protocol currently in the making on investments, and investments are critical actually for us to be able to find, to engage with taking advantage of the gaps, if you like how to build the infrastructure and strengthen it, how to invest and create jobs and opportunities. So that is another protocol that I think is important for us to look at. And then intellectual property rights are also key in this arena. And we find that there is an explosion, if you see around some of the countries in the areas of fintech, where we have a lot of innovation that is coming up. But without a structure necessarily or an enabling environment to build the capacities to support and protect those intellectual property rights. So IP in the AFCFTA is important. And last but not least, competition policy. And the whole area of consumer protection, consumer rights also comes in. Just so to say that the AFCFTA, I think, just as one sort of governance instrument that has come in, I think is ushering a range of possibility and enthusiasm. But why I make this point that it's not a panacea is because it really all depends on how the rules will be laid out and how they will also intersect with each other. Because it is the complexity of the agenda that we're talking about that I think, you know, needs us to pause for a moment and say, how do we make sure that we as, you know, Africans benefit from this hard work that's being put there? And this is, so I would like to just say that for that to happen, you need different actors that come in and play their role in a much more assertive manner. I think countries, we have learned, are certainly looking at shaping a digital agenda, but it seems to a large extent that that digital agenda is being shaped based on sovereign interests, individual country interests, and everybody says, I want to be one of the first to take advantage of the digital economy. I think the mindset that what we would like to see as an, you know, and I say we being the AE Trade Group, which is a private sector initiative of Africans from the continent and the diaspora that has been looking at this landscape, excited about these possibilities, but we are saying, let's go back to basics and look at how do we make sure that you have regional, you know, digital infrastructures that, for example, will reduce the costs of the kind of investments that are made. We see countries, all countries are investing in data centers, and I have no doubt that every country needs that capacity. But the question is, are there alternative models of perhaps having some kind of regional infrastructure that would optimize those investments and make it then more interesting for private sector investors to come in. And so that is really the, you know, the kind of discussion that we are engaged in, and we would like to see more of that happening, because once you start talking regional, you are then entering in the terrain of the challenges of lack of harmonization, the lack of interoperability of the systems, and the impacts that it has on the people that need to take advantage of this big marketplace. So who needs to be the beneficiaries? I think we all know that the continent, especially our economic base, is mainly micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And this is where I think the major opportunity lies. If we can imagine our digital agenda as Africa as being more of a grassroots digital transformation agenda, and we start to put out all our resources to ensuring that we can address some of the more challenging issues, such as the digital divide and the access that the majority of our citizens do not currently enjoy, be it for e-commerce and trade, or for learning, or for accessing government services. I think the whole experience of COVID-19, I think, just put this in sharp relief, that this is not an agenda that governments can keep on pushing back and saying that it is not such a high priority because they're facing other priorities. The nexus between digitization and learning, for example, it could be the difference between having a whole lost generation. So once you start looking at those trade-offs, I think the nexus between the AFCFTA, COVID-19, and I think the enthusiasm of the private sector coming in and seeing business opportunities could take us to a place where this agenda now becomes much more center stage. But I want to just end by saying, just in terms of these remarks, that what for me remains a poignant question is this question of owning the agenda. Who are the owners and the drivers of this agenda? And I think that this is a question for all of us, basically, sitting around the table, whether we come from academia, whether we come from the private sector, whether we come from the policy making space, because I think what we are not doing as well as we could do, and is really that aspect of building an ecosystem, I would say, that supports and drives the agenda in a more systematic way. And I think there's political will that we should start to look at doing this. And I'm sure that there are, experiences where some of this is already happening. But if you look back and you see, how do we connect all the different dots and the pieces between the policy initiatives under the AFCFTA, boosting intra-African trade, and all the aspects of that we need to address to make sure that this market has products that are made in Africa, where the value addition has happened in Africa. So you have those issues there to address as well. And then you have practical issues which we deal with on a day-to-day basis in the private sector, offering services to MSMEs, where they just say simply, look, I can't afford the data. Can somebody help address that? Or I don't trust that if I put, order something online, it's going to arrive. So we have to build trust amongst different stakeholders. And I think this is something that is a journey that we need to, I think, embrace and look at as a critical part of this transformation. So the soft issues like change management, leadership skills, good governance frameworks being built into it, for me, will be what will make or break our opportunity as Africa to move forward in this regard. So those are my initial thoughts. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Treasurer. I think you've highlighted a number of issues here for us, a lot of food for thought. Maybe to pick up on one of your points, as I go over to you, Alison. Treasurer mentioned she said that it all depends on how the rules are laid out, because this is a very complex transformational process. Alison, you've worked with several countries, you're cooperating also at the continental level, so you come also with a comparative perspective, and considering this question of complexity, how things are being done within countries or at the regional level, I was wondering what, in your opinion, are the evidence-based gaps for informed policy making in digital governance and regulation in Africa? And in the process, if you could reflect on some of these questions related, for instance, to the digital divide, equal access to data, as one of or some of the many issues that are at the table. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Faten, for the interesting comments that have preceded my input. So, as you say, lots from Bhaso and then lots from the other commentators who've already touched on things. So maybe I can just pull some bits and pieces together. But just to go to your primary question around, what evidence do we have for evidence-based policy, allows me also to just go back and engage a little bit with Bhaso's presentation and with the report, of course, a report by him and his colleagues, which of course is very comprehensive. Thank you. But perhaps I can just flag a few issues around the evidence gaps that we have, and look at the evidence that we do have and some of the problems with it. So, I think basically, if you look at kind of, what progress are we making towards the Sustainable Development Goals? What progress are we making towards the ICT targets underlying the Sustainable Development Goals? Well, we don't actually know. We don't know. All these indices that are being used, the World Economic Forum's Competitiveness Index, the III, the Facebook Economic Intelligence Unit, the World Bank various indices, all of these are using ITU data. And that we know that ITU data is extremely problematic across the African continent. They work with us extensively to try and fill those gaps. So using this kind of supply side indicators to assess progress, when you actually, basically they're looking at a number of active SIMs. Used to be only SIMs, now they're looking at a number of active SIMs. So this is where you get these, incredibly inflated figures. So in prepaid mobile markets, which dominate our markets, you have to get that demand side data to firstly understand, what the actual penetration rates. But more important than that, in this environment, in a broadband and an internet environment, in a digital economy and in a data economy environment, the issues are not primarily, or they are in the first instance, around connectivity and the digital divide. But as our colleague from WATRA was saying, there's many countries which have 90, 95, 99%, Rwanda, broadband coverage, and yet they have less than that 20% critical mass that we need in order to get the network effects and economic growth, multipliers associated with it. Who are, by the way, doing all the right things in terms of the reform agendas that they've been told they must do in terms of, e-gov, smart cities, and various kind of broadband initiatives. So I think we really have to get a better grip on the data before we're going to be able to really do evidence-based policy. And I must just say, in terms of agendas and who sets the agenda that Treasure was talking about, so for many years, some of you will know that Research ICT Africa has been doing these demand-side surveys, again, with partners in Asia and Latin America, to try and understand these post-connectivity challenges that we face. And also, many of the studies that are available look at those who are connected and why they, are unable to use the services as much, or et cetera, et cetera. So the important thing about these nationally representative demand-side surveys is that they look at those who don't have access as well, look at the reasons for marginalization and these barriers. These are absolutely critical to policy, and this is the only way we're going to take policy to this new reset, this new just social compact that the Secretary General, from everybody from the Secretary General to the World Economic Forum are talking about, is actually to understand these issues. Unlike voice, where you are simply connected or not, and of course, the more people that were connected, the greater the digital equality between those who are connected and not. But in this environment, what we have as one of our central policy concepts is this digital equality paradox, which really addresses the fact that we are simply overlaying these, more enhanced technologies over these structural inequalities and actually just increasing inequality. We're exacerbating many of the problems we're facing around, poverty, employment, equality and inequality. So this is really one of the most wicked problems, I think, after climate change. The Secretary General and people have identified it as the real factor of whether, this next century, or going forward in this next century, we are actually going to see more equitable outcomes and more sustainable outcomes. And as Treasure was saying, this is best exemplified in COVID. If COVID hasn't made this clear to us all, nothing else would have. So, Bhaso, although you speak about, the incredible over 100% connectivity, only of phones, not of smartphones. And you point out that the internet penetrations are so low. Measuring non-smartphones is almost not an indicator worth measuring in contemporary society. So, COVID came and went without any digital benefits for this continent at all. We don't have enough smartphones to do contact tracing. We don't have enough smartphones to do Bluetooth, tracking and hotspot tracking. We don't even have some of the capacities in many countries to use the mobile data for big data analytics and for smart repositories to understand what's happening with the disease for health purposes and others. So as I said, really, in order to prepare for the next pandemic, in order for economic and social reconstruction, that of course, after the African Continental Free Trade Agreement or area, these are all fantastic opportunities. The digital transformation strategy, these are all fantastic opportunities. But unless we really, address that digital inequality issue on the one hand, and then of course, as it manifests now, these new layers of inequality, what we're seeing in sort of data injustice and data exclusion, that the continent, the majority of the continent's people are simply excluded from these increasingly globalized processes of digitization and datification. And I suppose that's really what I would say, in terms of the digital agenda, that's really where the digital agenda really has to shift. And not shift to the fourth industrial revolution, which is really a World Economic Forum agenda that's driven by very particular big business interests and big tech interests. And of course, artificial intelligence is critical. It's the next general purpose technology. We've got to get our heads around it, but we won't get our heads around it until we address these far more fundamental issues. And the fact that donor money for research, donor money for implementation, literally it has been sucked into artificial intelligence, machine learning, and these kinds of things, and these really basic digital equality issues that, as I said, will really be determined levels of digital substitution when the next inevitable pandemic comes. You can't school without a smartphone, and we've got a phone survey that shows a surprising number of people who actually worked remotely on cell phones, although we thought it was kind of impossible. But then, of course, these very, very large numbers across the continent unable to digitally substitute in any way. So I would say that for us, we're very concerned at sort of the focus on the technology, so that's very technologically deterministic. Now we all went, we had to go mobile, and then we had to go broadband, and then we had to go, Internet of Things, and we all had to kind of divert our energies. And now we have to do artificial intelligence, and we've got to put all our energies into that. No, we've actually got to get these basics right. So that's a kind of broad thing. These are global processes, and because I might not get to it, it's important to flag, because they're global processes, and because these are potentially digital, global public goods, if they are managed correctly and resourced correctly and allocated correctly, they require global governance, global cooperation. And Africa has just not been sufficiently, participant in that, but also setting that agenda. So we standard setters. Whatever comes of data protection, GDPR, we just have to take it, and we have to say cybersecurity, whatever it is, we just have to accept it. And so, the points that were being made about, using regional power, being able to use the continental, power, not only for economies of scale and scope for markets and for competition, which is absolutely inevitable. Not even our bigger markets are able, without harmonization and economies of scale and scope across the continent, able to compete globally. But certainly the slightly smaller ones, or the few that aren't the big top ones, who are really going to be the beneficiaries of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, if it's going to be equitable for all, it's going to require that harmonization, and it's going to require us to get to caucus and get Africa positions on things that we can address. We've, in a sense, we were speaking about digital taxation, and sorry, I'll quickly do a quick side list, then I'll finish up. But the problem there is that we've seen not a coherent response. So that very many countries have actually pursued this unilateral taxation at a time that it would have been really important to get Africa positioned, if it's dissatisfied with what was happening, within the BEPS and various things, to lobby for those to be greater. Sorry, I'm just fighting off a bad cold. But at the moment, what we've got is a kind of rejection of it because it doesn't meet its needs, and actually us getting even less than we would get with the 15% or whatever it is, because currently it's unenforceable with our presence in our markets. So really a lot more coordination around that. And then the big point that Bhaso was implying with this digital taxation, which I think is the other flip side of the trade issue. These are the two big issues for the continent, is that if we get some decent revenues in terms of resource mobilization from taxation, from the right people, from the right companies, from big tech, instead of these regressive taxes on end users, which has pushed millions of people offline, or millions of people across the continent, hundreds of thousands in Uganda, etc., offline, contrary to the digitalization vision of Uganda. So it would also allow us to say there's maybe if you can actually say, yes, you do need revenues, but you should actually be getting them from Mark Zuckerberg, not from this mama in Kampala or whatever it is. That would make far more sense. So processes we need to be looking at these global processes, not just at the tech that is partially driving it, but it's also the markets that are driving the tech and the innovation. So these are all really requiring, as Treasure was saying, integrated, transversal strategies. Many of our countries are still got siloed ICT sector policies, sometimes still in contradiction with other policies. We need our energy, our green energy sectors. These are all things that are going to drive these energy intensive technologies that we want to use, data warehouses and things. All of these different policies have to be addressed. So we need these transversal policies at the national level that are harmonized at the continental level, and that will allow us to engage in global governance with at least a common voice, if not a unified voice on everything.
Thank you, Alison. It's a very important reality check, I think, that you're and the other panelists have brought to the table. It's the structural issues remain important. And so the question is, how do we focus on that rather than be distracted to some degree by this fast-moving context that we're operating in? Thank you to the three of you. For the viewers, the floor is open for questions. So if you do wish to ask a question, please feel free to do so through the chat option on YouTube or through Twitter. So we will have around 15 minutes, but maybe just to start perhaps the question time, maybe picking up on some of the points that were raised by the different speakers. Mr. Aboki, you spoke earlier of leapfrogging, to look at technology as an option. And at the same time, Treasure, you spoke of the importance of investments. And so I was wondering, I mean, to leapfrog, obviously that investment is required. And the question that I wanted to put on the table here, perhaps for you, Mr. Aboki, is what are the challenges for leapfrogging in your opinion?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's important to say, as if I want to speak as a regional body, it's important to have the right kind of policies, the right kind of frameworks that would attract the investment. I mean, global market players that would bring in money to ensure that countries leapfrog require the right kind of environment and atmosphere to operate. So it's important to really get that right, not just on the country national level, across the region and eventually across the continent. This would ensure that this would attract the global players to really key in to the system and bring a lot of investment. This would not in turn create that effect of leapfrogging the development gaps.
Thank you. If any other speaker wants to comment on this, please feel free to do so. I think Bhaso, you also had your hand up.
Yes, I agree completely with Aboki, and I would only add that maybe one of the other important considerations particularly when it comes to leapfrogging, a key challenge for me is sustaining those technologies. So I think alongside leapfrogging, you do need a skills revolution alongside that, so that you don't, as we often do, install some things with the help, bless them, of Germany, of China, and then you still need personnel from those countries to sustain and maintain, even for basic things, of those technologies. So I would say alongside leapfrogging, there should be a skills transfer, and not just, because leapfrogging is essentially a tech transfer, but I think there also then needs to be a skills transfer alongside that for it to be sustainable.
Thank you, Bhaso.
Just to add on,
go ahead, Alison.
Sorry, just to add on what Bhaso said, you know, I just absolutely agree. I just think, you know, to address this inequality and injustice that we see, you know, the critical issue is actually education. And often in these digital strategies, it's put down to digital literacy, you know, adult educate, turning more, you know, creating more digital natives, that sort of thing. But actually, it's, what we show from our modeling on our survey data is that it's actually education. So with many of our countries with, you know, broken or poor, you know, basic education problems, we've already got a problem there in terms of absorption of you know, active users, not just passive users of this equipment that Boki was referring to. So there's, you know, it's that issue right through to having the innovators, you know, the entrepreneurs, all sorts of things. So the human development challenge is actually a far greater challenge than our infrastructure challenge. The infrastructure challenge, we can throw enough money at it quickly enough, we can actually get it there. And we've seen it, it's there in many cases, but it's actually the human development challenge that is the biggest barrier of all. So absolutely agree, Bhaso. It's just you know, I think it's just really the most important point.
Perhaps picking up on that point, Alison, on the centrality of the human development challenge, as ought to be, one would say, within this debate on the digital transformation. In the paper, in the presentation of Bhaso, it was very clear that a lot of these initiatives are government driven. And I think it was in your presentation also, Treasure, that you highlighted the importance of bringing on board different actors, simply because of the multidimensionality of this agenda that goes, you know, not just the economic component, but also the rights component, the equality and justice component. And so I was wondering whether the panelists would like to perhaps share with the viewers some of the examples that are out there where we see a greater or attempts at least to open up further the space of digital transformation to focus more on the human development components, and how can that be upscaled, I would say, even more? Anyone can start.
Maybe I am just to make the point that, you know, there's a lot of work that's been done on you know, digitalization, online education, and these kinds of things. And I suppose, you know, those are absolutely critical. And I think we've seen with COVID, you know, the importance of being able to have online, you know, courses that we can pull off the shelf and that we've got, you know, ready and prepared. And that, of course, it, you know, that requires us to look at our universal education and broadband policies far more clearly, because, you know, we had all our schools connected in South Africa, or all our major schools connected in South Africa, but nobody could get to school. And, you know, the majority of the population actually didn't have majority of households didn't have smartphones. And that was, you know, relatively high levels of penetration compared to other countries. So, you know, we have to go back to thinking about our, you know, getting connectivity to homes with mesh networks, you know, connecting townships in ways that were different, because we thought we'd solved everything with the, you know, public Wi-Fi. And obviously there's some solutions there, but they're not things. So it's really challenged the way we think about, you know, universal access strategies, affordability, because even those people who had smartphones couldn't afford even the mandatorily reduced prices, etc. And so, what we really need, what we say as part of this Digital New Deal project that we have here, is that we can't continue to do the same things and hope for different results. We've got less than, as I said, 20% critical mass in the least developed countries using the existing models that we have. We have to go back. GSM has done extraordinary things. It's connected the continent in extraordinary ways. We've got over 100% voice connectivity. It's the model as it's currently licensed. The business model is unaffordable to the majority of people on this continent. So yes, we do need it to be competitive for business. That evolution will continue. There are actually enormous public interest applications with 5G that should be built into licenses to ensure that they are not just commercially high-end driven licenses. It's absolutely perfect technology to tap into dynamic spectrum, to use much lower cost rural spectrum, to use public Wi-Fi, etc. So I think what we really have to do is look at our licensing models, look at our business models, and experiment. We need low-cost experimentation. Those big exclusive licenses that people have paid a fortune for, and now people can't afford the services for, don't make them exclusive. Those operators don't want to do all that stuff that they don't want to do anyway. Find ways of allowing new entrants into the market. There are all sorts of new entrants with lower cost technologies. TV white space operates at 1/10 of the cost of GSM. We can have multiple players in this market, ensure that our 4G and 5G has licensing obligations or auction incentives that allow smaller players, micro players, to come into that spectrum, provide entrepreneurial opportunities that are viable, trying to create, SMME licenses out of, to compete with national operators in the national license, exclusive licensing thing it doesn't work, and we know it doesn't work. So I would just say, we really have to be regulatorily and policy innovative about this. This is a time for experimentation. We've got to do things differently. They're not working at the moment. We've hit a premium. Countries with strong ICT backgrounds and models and precedents, Kenya, Nigeria, even to some degree, we've kind of hit a wall on the broadband penetration. Even though in some of those countries we've had price wars that have driven those prices right down. So we have to be moving, even when we haven't hit a wall. It's growing very slowly now, and I think this is something that's not acknowledged by GSMA and by lots of players. This isn't a kind of obscure observation. So I think we have to do things very differently if we're hoping for different, more equitable outcomes.
Doing things differently, indeed. Any other comments from the other speakers? Just before I hand over to Olu to close? No. All right. Well, thank you very much from my end. It's been an extremely stimulating discussion. I think a very important reality check as we discuss the digital transformation agenda on the African continent. And I think there were so many issues that deserve their own webinar. But from my end, thank you very much to all the speakers. Back to you, Olu.
Thank you very much, Faten. Thanks you so much to all of the speakers on the panel. It's been great listening to you. And just like Faten said just now, this is the first in a series of webinars we're going to have on this issue around digital policies. So watch out, like I said earlier, watch this space. There's going to be more. Thank you so much also to Bhaso at the University of Johannesburg. Thanks to the University of Johannesburg for working with us on this. We will continue to work together on this. They are close collaborators of ours right now, and we hope to continue with that. Thank you very much to Mr. Aliyu Aboki from WATRA. It's great to have you here. Thank you for your contributions. Treasure Mapanga, thank you so much. Even though we can't see your face, we heard your voice, and we really appreciate your great contribution to the conversation. Dr. Gilwald, thank you very much. And actually, thanks to you and everyone for the reality check and sort of pointing us to the things that we still need to get done. And to sort of the ways we count, the methodology of counting what we have right? So that we are aware clearly of what we have and plan for what we can get. That's extremely important. Thank you so much. Thank you to Bhaso precisely for this point of highlighting. So it's one thing to get the technology, right? But the other thing is to be able to maintain it. And that's been an issue for Africa, not just in digital space, but in general. And we can't make the mistake. That's a mistake in this space anymore. So thank you so much. Like I said, watch this space. There's going to be more from me and from the APRI team. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, and great to meet everyone. Thank you for a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.